guys, it's Ursus here from the Eden Guild, and today I'm going to be talking about post-patch DPS in dungeons and fractals, things like that, for Thief. Now, you may have noticed that the warrior setups have changed, well, not drastically, but fairly significantly after the patch because of the new traits coming in, and more emphasis on the group buffs and things like that. But with Thief, that's not the case. We don't really boost group DPS, we are very selfish. So we only care about putting out the maximum DPS for ourselves and relying on buffs given to us by others, the only exception being might stacks. So the whole Rune of Strength thing, everyone's been talking about Rune of Strength recently. But personally, I don't see the benefit of Rune of Strength on Thief. On everyone else, it's fantastic, it's great. But for us, Scholar is still the best option because we're not distributing might stacks ourselves unless we are blasting fire fields. And in ideal situations, we won't have to blast fire fields. Other people will be doing that work for us, and we will get more damage in the long term because of our rune choice over strength. So let's go over the pretty obvious things which really haven't changed post-patch. So we have all Berserker. This has not changed. If you remember correctly, or if you didn't know, Thief can reach 100% crit chance in ideal group scenarios, in dungeons and things. So you don't have to worry at all about crit chance sigils, or about extra precision, or assassins, or like precise infusions, or anything like that. You don't have to worry about it at all. You just invest purely in power in Berserker and get as much ferocity and as much power as possible. Because it's just a natural course where you have the precision from Berserker setup that will get you to 100% crit chance in ideal groups. I believe it's something like even without Spotter you get like 98 or something stupid. So really don't concern yourself with crit chance. So we've got all Berserker here. This hasn't changed. Rune of the Scholar again hasn't changed, and like I said, I've explained why I still prefer Scholar over something like Strength. All Berserker accessories, and if I could afford it, well, I could probably afford it if I tried, but it's a stupid amount of money, which is just not worth it in my opinion. But you could get the power infusions, +5, and +5 agony resistance if you do fractals, but I don't do that. It's just way too much money for way too little benefit. It's absolutely ridiculous. So now we have the weapons, again, Berserker, sigils. One dagger has sigil of Knight, the other has sigil of Force. Sword Pistol, on the other hand, has exactly the same. We have sigil of Knight and sigil of Force. Underwater weapons, as if anyone cared, we have sigil of Serpent Slaying, just because Crate are the only enemies I ever fight underwater these days because of the Fractal. And sigil of Force because Night won't work as it's a day fractal, so we won't get the 10% damage bonus from that, so that's just the best course of action for me. And you may be asking, well, why don't I have any other weapons, any spare daggers, any spare pistols or swords that have undead slaying or outlaw slaying, flame legion slaying, whatever? The simple answer to that is I am a lazy bastard. And I don't really feel like carrying things around with me all the time. Like, my inventory is... I'm quite proud of how tidy my inventory is, honestly. Like, I have... like, everything just seems right. I don't want to shove tons more weapons in here with... well, they're not small, they are quite significant bonuses. But if you really care about that 10% boost in day dungeons, or you really care about the extra 5% over Force for, like, slaying or anything like that, then do that. Go get a dagger or a pistol or a sword with that undead slaying or that outlaw slaying or anything like that, and keep it around and swap it if you need to. But because I'm an extremely lazy man, I'm not going to bother doing that. I'm just going to take Knight and Force, and that's going to be me settled for pretty much every dungeon except for Arar. And honestly, in Arar I don't even take Thief these days. I usually take Mesmer or Warrior, because I've played Thief in Arar so many goddamn times and it's making me sick. So, yeah. So if you want to do that, get some slaying stuff, and take that with you. But if you just want to be sort of a general setup and just take things in most places and be set for yourself, then that's more than enough. Your knight and force will be fine. Short bow, for some reason I have Sigil of Fire. I'll put force on that at some point and Sigil of Night. But the question is, most people will be asking anyway, the usual meta setup has this. And it makes sense, right? 2 melee weapon sets, maximum DPS at all times. Well, honestly, it's not that difficult to just do this. Just to swap out dagger or sword pistol, depending on whether we are fighting trash or whether we are fighting bosses. Sword pistol for trash, dagger for bosses, obviously. But why do I bother keeping short bow? The answer to that is I am not a trusting person. Even if there are 3 elementalists in the group that are all using persisting flames and they're all using scepter dagger and blasting like crazy, I still won't trust them. I still won't trust them to get 25 might. So what I do is I keep short bow with me at all times, so if somebody puts a 5 field down, I am immediately going to put down as many blasts as possible before the fight begins, just because I don't trust people. So that's why. And then obviously I go into the fight and start hitting things with some might stacks. I guess I have those extreme trust issues because Thief doesn't have any self-sustaining might stacks, so I have to rely on those 5 fields, and I have to rely on other people, I have to rely on for great justice and things like that. So I'm hyper aware, I'm extremely paranoid of those stacks, so I just keep short bow in case we ever need those stacks before a fight begins. And you know, if you're like me and you have extremely crippling trust issues, then that's why you would take that. But if you do have trustworthy teammates, or you find yourself getting enough might stacks to get by, then just do this. Just have sword pistol and 2 daggers, and you'll be just fine. Yeah, so that's that. Between fights, just do that. Like so. And voila, that's how I play most dungeons. So, that's all the equipment settled. Now let's go over the core traits. I say core because there are 2 variations, which also vary within themselves sometimes. So, this is the core build, 6-6. Ignore these for now. I'll go over critical strikes first, because that's the obvious one. And you may notice that it's very similar to the old meta build. You can change this to Furious Retaliation or Signets of Power. Well, I don't know about Signets of Power. I don't really find that very reliable, because if you use that, you get 5 might stacks for 10 seconds, but then you have 35 seconds of nothing. Of that 180 power is gone. It's just not worth it. So I wouldn't take Signets of Power, so forgive me for even mentioning it. I would take Practice Tolerance or Furious Retaliation, depending how much Fury your group gets. Then Side Strike, that 7% crit chance is critical to reaching those massive crit chances that I've been talking about with the Thief class. Then we've got First Strikes, which is massively important, and it's a huge, huge focus of this build going forward. And I'm going to have to go into massive detail on that later. Because basically, before the patch, we saw this trait and we thought, yay, great, DPS boost, and we just forgot about it and we left it at that. We didn't really question it too much, but now I'm going to have to go into huge detail on how manipulating this trait with our build variations is going to be a huge boon to us. So keep this trait in mind. And then of course we've got Keen Observer, which is another critical chance boost that is critical to reaching those massive close to 100% or past 100% totals. Opportunist, yeah, after the nerf, not so fantastic, but it's there and it's free, so we might as well take it. And then Executioner is the obvious trait to give us 20% damage in most scenarios against trash and bosses. Because, let's be honest, bosses reach 50% health rather quickly in most cases. So, now let's go into Deadly Arts. We have, don't really care much about this, but Poison is a dot, so it is damage, so not going to complain. And then we have Sundering Strikes, which is a massive DPS boost for a group. Vulnerability is a fantastic thing, and if you're using Sword Pistol on trash and you just spread those stacks like confetti, it's going to be awesome. Vulnerability is amazing. never, ever, ever go anywhere without this trait. This is almost what defines like why Thief is just so good for DPS in organized groups. So always have this at all times, never leave without it. Lotus Poison is a very good trait, and it's also a good reason I would take Shortbow secondary for Fractals. Fractals, when you go into the really high tiers, weakness is the most important condition in the entire game. Well, let's be honest, weakness is already the most dangerous for mobs, so you want to be getting as much of this as possible, which is why I have Scale Venom. I'll go into Consumables later, but that's why I have Scale Venom available, and I have Shortbow, so I can put down the Poison Field, which will grant weakness as well. So weakness is amazing, never underestimate it. Everyone should be taking it, everyone should have Scale Venom, everyone should have like Warhorn on Warriors to get AoE weakness. In those high level fractals where weakness could be the difference between a 1 and a 2 or 3 shot, it's very important. So do not underestimate this trait, even with the internal cooldown. This trait changes in 3 different ways. See what I mean when I talk about variation? So, in trash runs, this is combined training. When we get extra damage with our pistol whips, if for some reason we want to use it, this is the best thing to use if you want to get, if you want to keep your health at maximum, if you want to get that scholar bonus at all times, if for some reason a mob manages to hit you in the stack, then you can just do that, and most of your health will go back up because of the cleave. You'll get the scholar bonus back, and you'll get the 5% crit chance from Keen Observer, and so on and so forth. So it's always a good thing just to have extra damage from that pistol whip. It's not that necessary because auto attack is the source of most of your damage, but then again, it's free damage in trash runs, so I slot it in anyway when I'm changing the builds around. If we're not on trash runs and we're against bosses, this becomes dagger training, which gives me 5% with my backstabs, my cloaks and daggers, and all that stuff, which is again fantastic. Compound DPS multipliers are just the greatest thing in the universe, so you want to be taking that. However, this changes if we have Fiery Greatsword available. It doesn't change if we have Lightning Hammer, only with Fiery Greatsword. I'll go into more detail on this later, but for now, just consider these traits like this. And now the new trait that came in with this patch, Reveal Training. This is big. This is a very significant DPS boost, and taking advantage of this as much as possible is going to be a defining factor in your DPS going forward. So, if you don't know, 200 power is roughly the equivalent of 5 to 6 might stacks, I think. It's like 5.5-ish, which is not to be like, you know, snorted at. That is important, especially when it's not actually might stacks. It goes above 25 might, so you get even more power, and then you've got Banner of Strength, and then you've got Empower Allies, and all that other stuff. So this is going to be huge. Very, very significant. So, yeah, that's the core build. And again, I'll go into some other changes that this goes under with Fiery Greatsword and stuff, but the main variations other than this come from Trickery and Shadow Arts. So you may recognize this. This is the old meta setup in terms of the numbers, where we have Flanking Strike, which gives us 5% damage attacking from behind, which is a nice boost for backstab rotations, and honestly, most trash fights. There are very few, well, not very few, it's a significant amount of scenarios where you want to get rid of this and do the other thing, but in pretty much every trash run there is, you want to be taking this. The only reason you would change to the other variation of this build is in boss fights, and those boss fights have a specific condition to go to this build. So in most scenarios you're going to be sticking with this. It's very familiar, everyone knows this build. Nike did it like a while ago, I believe, and it still works just fine. It's the best thing there is, but the important thing here is first strikes and compoundly affecting Reveal Training. So this is the change, the all-important change. instead of 10 Trickery in boss fights with specific conditions, we do this. We go to 10 Shadow Arts, 2 Shadow Arts, excuse me, and we get Infusion of Shadow. Why do we get that? Well, it's very easy to explain, but I would rather show you by example. So let's go over that. So this would be the old DPS rotation from the meta that we knew and loved before the patch, where we have 2 Trickery and flanking strikes. We would Cloak and Dagger, backstab, auto attack chain, double strike, and then repeat over and over, continuously, stealing whenever we need initiative. When the boss gets lower than 50%-ish, then we start using Heartseeker as much as we can. That's it. That's the rotation. That's just how it is. And pre-patch, that was the best way to do it. Why was it the best way to do it? Just because of that extra double strike maintaining initiative as we went on. Because constantly doing Cloak and Dagger and backstab and just an auto attack chain, without that double strike your initiative runs out very, very quickly. So this is the new DPS rotation when we take into account Infusion of Shadow. So, instead of that double strike, we do Cloak and Dagger, backstab, auto attack chain, Cloak and Dagger, backstab, and repeat. And that is literally it until we get to 50% health, where we start Heartseekering when under the effects of Revealed, and keep the effects of Revealed for as long as possible with stealth utilities and things like that until the boss dies. So as you can see, I'm getting as much. I messed up there with the Heartseeker on accident, but you get the drill. You get the idea of the difference in rotation. So, why has the rotation changed? Because some people may think, well, this works. It always has worked. Like this Trickery stuff. Why change it? And you'd be right. It does work. For most situations. The times it changes are not rare, but they are noticeable, and you should change for those encounters. Most boss fights, yeah, seriously, most boss fights in high-level Fractals and some dungeons are going to warrant this change in rotation and traits. So, I'll go first off by saying that this kind of setup is your default. You'll want to be sticking with this for all trash runs, and you want to be sticking with this for all boss fights with this rule in mind, okay? We have to consider first strikes and reveal training. If a fight, a boss fight, a single target boss fight with the dagger rotations, if that fight lasts longer than about 25 to 30 seconds, if it lasts longer than that, then you need to get rid of this and do this, and take Infusion of Shadow. If the fight takes less than that, if it takes like 15 to 20 seconds, then don't bother with that and just stick with the Trickery setup. Why do we do that? Well, for the first 15 to 20 seconds, this setup, the Trickery setup, is better DPS. It always is better DPS for the first 10 to 15 to 20 seconds. It varies depending on Opportunist and all sorts of other things. I can't test it thoroughly because I don't have steady weapons anymore and all that sort of stuff, but you know, if somebody manages to prove me wrong with raw number crunching in some way, then I'll be happy to post it in an annotation somewhere. But for now, this is what I've come up with experimentation and personal experience by running with all these traits very thoroughly. So for like, I estimate for the first 15 to 20 seconds, this is always higher DPS, and then after that time, your DPS begins to sink, and it begins to sink quickly. And why is that? Because, number one, you can't maintain first strikes. And maintaining first strikes is important. That's a 10% damage boost. And when you don't have Infusion of Shadow boosting you up after every Cloak and Dagger, every time you go in stealth, you don't go back up to 12 by the time you use another one. Which means your initiative count sinks and sinks and sinks and sinks and sinks until eventually you lose this damage bonus altogether after that 15 to 20 seconds. But this also means that doing this rotation, remember, you have to do a double strike to keep your initiative going for that time. You have to do the auto attack chain, let's pretend that was 3 strikes, and then do it again, the first attack of the chain, and then Cloak and Dagger. It's not attack, 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 Cloak and Dagger. It's attack, 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 Cloak and Dagger. Which means you're accessing backstabs less often. It also means you're using Cloak and Dagger less often, that's a lot of damage. Cloak and Dagger is a huge amount of damage. You're not getting revealed as often. Well, you're not getting the that rotation going as often. That revealed the auto attacks under the power of revealed Cloak and Dagger backstab. You're not doing that as often because of that extra double strike, and because you can't sustain initiative for longer than that, you lose first strikes. So overall, after about 20 to 25 seconds, your damage sinks way below the sustainable DPS of this setup, where you have constant access to initiative. It doesn't matter how often you use Cloak and Dagger and backstab. When you get the chance, you will always go back up to 12, which means you always have more than 6 initiative doing your rotations, which means every time you backstab, you will always have first strikes available. So after like 25 seconds, if a fight lasts longer than that, you want this sustainable DPS. It's just way better in every way, shape, and form. And let's be honest, when the DPS overall, due to the ferocity change, has gone down, fights are going to last that long in a bunch of situations. There are some bosses which are still pure paper, like Lieutenant Kohler in Astronomian Catacombs. Like most of the downscale dungeons, you don't even have to worry about DPS. Like everything melts instantly. But somewhere like COE or Ara, or like open world champs, I guess. I don't know. I don't do open world stuff that often, so. But I would assume open world champions, now that they're events and stuff, they would take a lot longer. So if you wanted to put down max DPS on those, you would want to be using Infusion of Shadow. So that's the criteria you have to take into account between Shadow Arts and Trickery. If the fight takes less, or should take less than 15 to 20 seconds, then do a backstab rotation with this. If, however, your backstab rotations are going to last longer than about 25 seconds-ish, then you want to be sustainable, which means you do this, and your DPS ends up being higher in the long run during the encounter. So keep that in mind. It's an estimate, however. It depends entirely. It's just an estimate. Just an estimate. It's a very important thing to take into account, because I can't use steady weapons, and this kind of complex calculation, like the numbers changing on the fly all the time, it's very, very difficult to pin down the exact moment where it's better. So just use estimate, use personal experience, go around in dungeons with a dedicated dungeon group that you know and get used to, so you know sort of when these builds will apply. With pugs, honestly, if we're just going to stick with pugs, then I would just stick with the Trickery thing. Sorry, not that. If you're sticking with pugs, then I would use this, because you don't know how much DPS these pugs are going to be doing. They might not be blasting fire fields or anything like that. I would just stick with this to make sure that you have sustainable DPS as a fight goes on, rather than losing it all after like 4 or 5 rotations, say. So with pugs, I'd go with this, and with fights over 25 seconds-ish, and any other situation, including trash runs where you have sword, use this. Now, let's go into the fiery greatsword stuff that I was talking about earlier. So, I was talking about how I change this to a third thing. That third thing is improvisation, but only with fiery greatsword. If we have lightning hammer, if an elementalist decides that they want to give us a lightning hammer, they say, yeah, take it, thieves do DPS, then you take that. You do this. You get the dagger damage, compound modifier. You keep your daggers equipped. Then you take the hammer with improvisation, and you get 10% damage while you're using it. However, if you have a fiery greatsword, fights aren't going to last long, because you're doing a fiery rush into a wall. That's pretty much the only reason you ever use fiery greatsword, is to rush into a wall. So what you do is you take this and put it back to reveal training, and you take this and take improvisation. That's more damage overall than your daggers, but reveal training is important. That's another 200 power, that's another, like, I don't know, 8 8-9% DPS. I'm not sure on the exact numbers, but it's DPS. It's serious DPS boosts. And you want both of them if you're going to use Fiery Greatsword. So let's run through a mock scenario here. Let's say I was behind the rock. Let's say I was here. And all the group is here. They've stacked. They've all used fire fields. They've got 25 might and they're prepared. They've got banners and everything. And the boss is over here. Someone attacks me. Ow, I've been smacked in the face. So I am the boss. I run here and I've been line of sighted and now I'm here against the rock. Now, imagine that boss is still there and I'm here. I've picked up the Fiery Greatsword. Now what I'm going to do is take that Fiery Greatsword, swap this out just for example, Blinding Powder, and then Fiery Rush into the boss while stealthed. Because what this does is gives the entire Fiery Rush the benefit of 200 power, which is massive. And you also have the 10% damage of the Fiery Greatsword in the first place with Improvisation. You also have time to do the third skill, the Fiery Rush, Fiery Whirl, I think it's called. You get time to do that as well as the Fiery Rush while under the effects of Revealed, and that's massive. And if you get time to do a second one, the second Fiery Rush is pretty much when the boss dies. That is when the boss is going to collapse dead, after the second Fiery Rush, if not just before. Because Fiery Rush is just stupid OP against walls. So, when you need a second stealth, you use Hide in Shadows, and then do it again. And Fiery Rush into the wall, and then do that, the Fiery Whirl into the wall as well. And by then the boss should be dead, because Fiery Greatsword is OP as hell. This is the trait setup I would use for that situation. I get that Revealed training bonus, and I get Improvisation. And that covers pretty much every situation, really, that I can possibly imagine. Just keep in mind the changes between Shadow Arts and Trickery, and the Improvisation traits. And those are the only real things that you have to concern yourself with. Everything else just works by itself. So, let's go over some other stuff. My consumables. I have potions for every dungeon. I have Outlaw Slaying, Nightmare Court Slaying, Dredge Slaying, Inquest Slaying, Flames Legion, Sons of Sparnia. I don't really use the Icebrood Slaying. That only applies to the other paths. I do path 1, and the bosses are Sons of Sparnia, so that works for me. Undead Slaying. I'm way too cheap to get powerful ones for some strange reason. Ascalonian Catacombs doesn't have a potion, so I just use Sharpening Stones. And my food in almost all scenarios is Dragon Breath Buns, or any food that gives you 200 power for killing an enemy. But after the patch, there may be better food. I think I might get Power and Precision food instead. I'm not sure what the name of the food is. Give me a second. I believe it is Truffle Steak. It should be, anyway. Truffle Steak. There we go. 100 power and 70 precision. That's the kind of food I'll probably be using from now on. If this proves to not be as fantastic as it used to be. Because that is a little bit of a nerf overall, because that's 70 ferocity. That's 4% critical damage. Just over 4%. So that's half. That's a loss of half of the crit damage. But that 200 power is significant in trash runs. It really is. So yeah. I would choose between this and this. It's up to proper theory crafters to go into when to use which one. But for most trash runs I am definitely going to stick with this food for that 200 power, because everyone's going to be dying constantly. The mobs, hopefully, not the players. And then Plate of Truffle Steak, I would probably swap to for bosses, because no one else is going to be dying during that time. But since I'm lazy, I will probably stick with that. For Fractals, however, where we want more sustain, I will be taking Seared of Malice on top of it, but I will also be taking Lifesteal Food, 66% chance to steal life on crit, and that precision is always a nice boost. And the utility thingy-majig, whatever this is called, like that, what would be Sharpening Stones or Potions, I take Scale Venom. Like I've said before, weakness is the most important condition in the entire game in PvE, so you want to get as much as possible in Fractals. Now, utilities. I've just said Signal of Malice is my go-to heal. You're healing with Pistol Whip is absolutely ridiculous. So you can maintain a Scholar bonus very easily, seeing as a health pool is low by default. And any other circumstance, against boss fights I will usually take Withdraw, because it's a free dodge. Free dodges are always good. Dodging is like stupidly important as a thief. But if not that, then Signal of Malice. Hide in Shadows, I only ever use it for the Fiery Rush I just talked about, for a second stealth, but most of the time we don't get enough time to even do a second Fiery Rush, so Blinding Powder is more than enough. That being said, Blinding Powder, this particular utility slot changes very often. Sometimes I will have Blinding Powder, sometimes I will have Smokescreen, like for the Heartseekering through it, backstab, then Heartseeker or revealed, keep Heartseekering until I'm stealthed again, then backstab. Like, lots of free DPS coming from Smokescreen, which is a very good thing to use, like you would have seen earlier. If you watched the clip of me using Reveal Training and the Shadow Arts tree to kill the Golem, then you'll see what I mean about Smokescreen. But it's also Mass Blinding in Trash, which is fantastic. You can just sit in it, and not only do you absorb projectiles, but you also blind all of the trash around you, especially in the Ascalonian Fractal, when you have all those warriors jumping on you. When you're stacking and you put that smoke screen down, it's a massive help to your team. Like, nobody even takes a hit for the whole fight, which is fantastic. Shadow Refuge, I sometimes put that in that slot, because in some boss fights it's just nice to take the aggro away if someone downs. Sometimes I'll take Infiltrator Signet if I'm using the Trickery tree, if I don't have that Infusion of Shadow bonus going. Shadow Step sometimes, like very rarely. We don't need to break stuns very often. There is very little in the way of CC and PvE, so yeah. But sometimes, I don't know, if there is no other reason to take anything else, then I will take Shadow Step, but it's a rare thing. This second slot is also subject to change, but by default it's always Assassin Signet. That power boost is just too good. I never use it though. It's just I take it just for the passive benefits. The 15% more damage on the 5 attacks is nice to finish off bosses like, I don't know, Lupicus or the final boss of any dungeon when there's nothing else to follow. But if that Signet is on cooldown and you're fighting trash, then you've lost the equivalent of like 4 or 5 stacks of might during that time, so it's just not worth it. Which is why Signet use and all that stuff is not worth it. Just because the passive losses after you've used the Signets, like that trade-off is just not very good. But this one I never change. This is the one Signet that never leaves my bar for any reason, no matter what it is. And there's one specific reason for that, and it's the dodges. Dodging is the most important thing in this game. I think everyone knows that by now, in the PvE scene anyway. And this gives you 2 free dodges. But not just you, it gives your entire team 2 free dodges. So if you're on TeamSpeak and someone says, like someone just says, oh, dodges, you just go like anywhere near them and press it, and boom, they've got 2 dodges, and they'll be alive for much longer. You know, if they've messed up a dodge for some reason. So that's a massive, massive boon for your team. Like, honestly, I think it's on par with Guardians giving everyone Aegis and stuff like that. It's just incredible, incredible support. But just to help, it also removes a condition on everyone. Not the misconception that it removes an ally. Removes an ally? That's a pretty powerful Signet. No, it removes a condition for every ally, so it would remove 5 from you if you had 5 teammates. That's not the case. For some reason, people used to think that, but that's not how it is. Thank God for this new tooltip. So it removes 1 condition from everyone around you, not for everyone around you. But it's still good. That endurance gain is ridiculous. When we take into account like the total endurance gains throughout the fights, like if we're against Mossman, for example, we can have Withdraw, and we can have Signal of Agility, and we can also have Wild Strike, which gives us endurance gain on dagger auto attacks. And if we have Infusion of Shadow, we're going to be doing the backstab rotation more often. We don't need to do the double strike before the Cloak and Dagger, which means we're using Wild Strike more often over time, which means we have more endurance over time, which means that we have even more dodges than we did before, which is just an incredible boon to you. So, in general, like, the compound effect of everything plus Signal of Agility is just incredible help for you, and for everyone else, really. I think that pretty much covers everything, really. I will be sure to post some dungeon runs using like the variations in the build and everything whenever I get the chance, but I just wanted to make this video to sum everything up and to give you all the information at once in as much detail as I possibly could. So I hope this helps. Take this wherever you want and have fun with it and enjoy your massive deeps from reveal training. Yeah, I'll see you guys around. Peace.